For most Australians, their home is their castle and most significant financial asset. Rising house prices has often been referred to as a crisis, as younger generations feel they are increasingly being priced out of the market. Many younger Australians are instead now choosing to rent rather than buying their own home. And is this such a bad thing? Choosing to buy a home can have substantial impact from both a financial and an emotional perspective. Holistically considering the financial implications of owning a home and its impact on our overall life satisfaction are important. I'm Chris Bailey, financial planner at Prosperity Planners, and in this video, I hope to outline why renting, in many cases, can be a more optimal decision than buying a home. While I'm qualified to provide financial advice, I've not taken into account your personal circumstance when producing this video. So please make sure you consider the appropriateness of the information discussed, having regard to your own objectives, financial situation, and needs. We've all heard that rent money is dead money, but the reality is renting is not necessarily a bad financial decision. Catchphrases like this indicate a very superficial analysis of the extenuating considerations and only serve to bolster superficial societal pressure to pursue material things. I'll outline why the numbers don't necessarily stack up when placed under scrutiny shortly. However, first a discussion of some of the non-financial considerations I think will be useful in the first instance. As a general rule, human beings are not very good forecasters. We can't easily predict what's going to make us happy in the future, especially when it comes to making major financial choices. The status quo is to go to school, get qualified, get a job and buy a home. That's just how things are done. And we seldom stop to think if this trajectory is right for us, and if this progression is going to make us happy. The research is mixed when it comes to analysing if homeowners have increased levels of happiness compared to renters. In the paper titled, "Does the Dream of Homeownership Rest Upon Biased Beliefs?" A test based on predicted and realised life satisfaction, the authors find that on average, people systematically overestimate the long-term satisfaction gain of living in an owner-occupied dwelling. I expect that there are some other heuristics at play here as well, as we can easily make the mental shortcut of home ownership equating to wealth. And this makes sense, as the promise that home ownership affords you is increased levels of wealth. There has been research that indicates a positive correlation between increased levels of wealth and increased levels of happiness. In the paper titled, "Money Does Not Buy Happiness, or Does It?" A reassessment based on the combined effects of wealth, income, and consumption, the authors analyse the impact of economic well-being and happiness in Australia, in Britain, in Germany, Hungary, and the Netherlands. They conclude that happiness is considerably more affected by economic circumstance than previously believed. In all 5 countries, wealth did affect life satisfaction. But does owning a home lead to increased levels of wealth? Well, not necessarily. For most of us, though, it does lead to increased levels of debt. The research of multiple sources of academic studies find that there is a strong inverse relationship between levels of debt and levels of well-being. If buying a home entails servicing significant levels of debt, then we may have to check if taking on a large mortgage is a reasonable strategy if our primary motivation is indeed happiness. Perhaps we're not motivated by happiness. Imagine for a moment we are strictly rational creatures that make all of our decisions based on spreadsheets and simply want to optimize for greater financial outcomes rather than emotional ones. How does owning stack up when compared to a renting alternative? To work this out, we need to count the costs. Understanding the costs of renting is easy. It's simply the rent you pay plus any utilities. Determining the cost of owning is not as straightforward. I've identified the main cost of owning as stamp duty, mortgage costs, council rates, insurance, utilities, maintenance, depreciation, and opportunity cost. This is a much more exhaustive list than most would be typically willing to give account for when comparing how well they have done in property markets. We can begin to see why people prefer to adopt the Sesame Street approach to arithmetic by simply subtracting their home's sale price with their home's purchase price in order to compare their improved financial position. This neglects important details, which we'll work our way through now. As utilities are paid by both renters and homeowners, for this comparison, we can assume that they just cancel each other out. Stamp duty is a significant upfront cost. However, as it's not ongoing, I'll be charitable and not include it in the comparison. This leaves us with just council rates, insurance, maintenance, depreciation, and opportunity costs to account for. To start, How much you pay to council for shared amenities is going to be different depending on where you live. For the sake of this discussion, we can assume a rate of 0.5% of the value of your property. You can easily find what rate you'll be liable to pay by contacting your local council. Next is depreciation. And this might be somewhat counterintuitive for many, as common wisdom suggests that property prices continue to rise and not depreciate. That may be somewhat true for the land value. However, it's not true for the bricks and mortar of the house itself. Over time, through use and age, the building will depreciate in value, and this needs to be taken into account. Whether this is through normal wear and tear, or through functional obsolescence, with older dwellings being less desirable than newer ones. You can either pay for this as you go by continually renovating the premises and paying in cash, or you will pay for it when you ultimately sell the property. Either way, you'll have to wear this cost eventually. In addition to this, are maintenance costs. There's a reason why Bunnings, one of Australia's most recognised brands, has had such success serving both contractors and homeowners as their target market. This goes to show just how much Australians are required to spend on maintenance each year. The Australian Tax Office allows a 2.5% depreciation figure to be applied to investment properties. It's fair to assume that residential properties depreciate at the same rate as investment properties. However, as depreciation is only applicable to the building itself, we will need to determine the ratio of the value of the building compared to the land value. For example, on a $1 million property with a $400,000 dwelling, you would have a ratio of 40%. Conveniently, in this example, 40% of the ATO's 2.5% depreciation figure works out to be 1% of the total property value. So far, we can assume ongoing costs of 0.5% for council rates, plus 1% for depreciation and maintenance. Next is opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is the difference between what you've earned holding your capital in your home compared to what you could have earned should you have chosen to use your money for some other purpose. One other purpose could be investing in the stock market. To determine the opportunity cost, we need to understand what the long-term, historical, total real returns of varying asset categories has been. Surprisingly, the real total return of equities and property has been remarkably similar over the past 150 years in Australia. Australian shares have given an average total return of 7.79%, while property has given a total return of 6.37%. Total returns include capital growth plus income. In the case of shares, the income component are the share dividends, while in the case of property, the income component is its rental yield. As we're discussing owner-occupied properties in this discussion, property owners will forego the rental income component of housing's total return, leaving them with only the capital growth component, which has been 2.53% historically. Let's be generous and round this up to 3%. Had the homeowner, in this example, simply invested in the Australian share market, then the opportunity cost would have been 7.79% share market return, less housing's 3% annual capital gain, giving a total opportunity cost of 4.79%. However, the Australian share market only comprises 2% of the global investable landscape. As equity investors are not constrained geographically in the same way that property investors are, a fairer comparison will be to include the global share market as a whole when calculating opportunity costs. Given this, one might use the MSCI World Index as a proxy for global share markets. In doing so, we see that the historical global share market return since 1970 has been 9.9%. However, historical returns and expected future returns are not the same. To still man this argument, I'll use a dialed down expected share market return figure of 6.5%. However, I will not apply the same reduction to housing's capital component, leaving this at the assumed 3% figure mentioned previously. This leaves us with a total opportunity cost of 3.5%. So let's review where this leaves us. On a $1 million property, our total ongoing cost each year will be $5,000 in council rates, 0.5% per year, $10,000 in depreciation and maintenance, 1% per year, and $35,000 in opportunity cost, 3.5% per year. This leaves the property owner with total ongoing costs of $50,000 each year. This means that purchasing a $1 million home or choosing to rent for $960 per week are financially equivalent strategies. Naturally, this does require the renter to maintain discipline in making contributions to a global share index portfolio for the math to check out. A common objection that I hear is that property may well have a lower expected return than shares. However, property allows people to utilize leverage. It's through leverage that people have been able to build significant wealth. It's true that leverage plays a role. a significant one. And people typically can borrow more easily for things like purchasing a home compared to things like investing in the stock market. If you're like most people, you'll require a mortgage to purchase your home rather than buying in cash. Let's review a scenario where you have, say, a 20% deposit to facilitate this $1 million purchase. The cost of council rates, maintenance, and depreciation will remain unchanged at $15,000 per year. However, there will be a notable improvement in your opportunity costs, as you now have substantially greater amount of capital working for you than you otherwise would. A $200,000 deposit plus $800,000 mortgage with the assumed 3% capital growth will provide you with a $30,000 capital gain in the first year. Should you choose to rent and instead invest your $200,000 deposit, you would have earned just $13,000, applying the previously used 6.5% expected share market return assumption. However, if you've been paying attention, you'll note that until now I have not included the cost of borrowing in my calculations. At the time of producing this video, typical mortgage rates are about 6%. Despite increasing rates being in the press recently, this 6% figure is not too dissimilar to historic averages. Borrowing $800,000 on a 30-year loan at 6%, the interest you pay to the bank in the first year will be $47,000. So we can see that even with leverage, owning is not an optimal financial strategy. What you make up for in opportunity cost through leverage is not outweighed by the cost of borrowing, as homeowners are still left with total ongoing costs of $45,000 on $1 million home, or about 4.5% of the property value. This impact will become more pronounced the greater the mortgage rate. There's no way around it. Just as renting comes with its costs, so does owning a home. This cost will typically be in the range of 4 to 6% of the property value once everything has been accounted for. All this is not to say that homeownership is a bad decision. It may well be a very good decision for the right person in the right circumstance. Mature consideration of the facts, buyers' motivations, and also recognizing that it's not necessarily an optimal financial strategy when compared to a renting alternative will assist people in not getting caught up in the housing mania that seems to endemically persist in the Australian psyche. On a personal note, my wife and I have chosen to rent because it works for us and our current stage of life. In time, we expect that this will change. Until then, we've both been enjoying the flexibility and the freedom that renting affords us, and know that we're not in a worse off financial position because of it. If you know someone who will benefit from the information in this video, then please share this with them. If you have any other financial planning related questions that you would like me to address in future videos, then please let me know by commenting or connecting with me directly. Thanks for watching.